My guest today is Stewart D. McLaurin. He's the president of the White House Historical Association in Washington, D.C., and the author and editor of a brand new book about an unusual person, James Hoban, designer and builder of the White House. And there's the book right there with Stewart. Stewart, welcome to Horizon TV.
Thank you, Rob. It's terrific to be with you today.
Yeah, so you've got this big, thick book about somebody named James Hoban, and I had never heard of the dude. And, he's apparently this Irish draftsman who comes over here and does a deal with George Washington. Tell us about this guy.
Well, this is a remarkable story of a young man, a builder and designer, whose name is not well known, but whose life work is known to everyone around the world by three simple words: the White House. Yeah. Compelling story, one of the early pursuers of the American dream, as I would say it, left Ireland, came here to achieve his dreams, and his dreams exceeded his greatest expectations.
Yeah.
And he first went to Philadelphia. There were ads in the local paper there. He ended up in Charleston, where we believe he had some relatives, and set up shop there. And that's where he was eventually discovered by George Washington on a happenstance introduction.
It was just kind of this impromptu meeting that was set up with a group of Charleston's upper level folks, and he gets to meet Washington. Must have been quite an experience.
Well, George Washington was on a southern swing through the states at that time, and he was in Charleston. And as he was hosted and feted everywhere he went, he was in a local home and was introduced to this young man. At the time, he was not in the market, if you will, for a designer and builder of the new president's home. But it was a year later when he was, and he reflected upon meeting this gentleman, and he knew that Hoban would be exactly what he wanted: someone who was skilled in building the large stone homes that were common in Europe at the time, but not yet prevalent in the United States.
Yeah, and Hoban was essentially at that time a draftsman. I mean, he probably a little different from what we think of as an architect today.
That's right.
He certainly didn't know CAD and BIM design, but
that's right.
That was the training.
There were some architects of note at the time. Benjamin Latrobe, of course, was the English architect that was here. Pierre L'Enfant was also doing work in what was called the Federal City at the time.
Bullfinch was here. Yeah.
Hoban had been exposed and trained in architecture in Dublin. He was trained at the Dublin Society School of Architectural Drawing. He had been a student of Thomas Ivory. He would have seen some iconic buildings in Dublin and been a part of those, but he himself was certainly not a household name in architecture.
Yeah. What the building that apparently from reading your book, and it was obviously what is known as Leinster House, or is it Leinster House?
Leinster House,
Leinster
which
House,
was
yeah.
a large stone building in Dublin. When you walk up on it today, as I have, and you see it, you think, that's the White House. It doesn't have the porticos that our house now does. Incidentally, Hoban went back later, and with Presidents Monroe and Presidents Jackson, added the north and south portico some years after the original White House was built, and then rebuilt after the British fire. But he would have been exposed to Leinster House, which is now the seat of the Irish Parliament. The old Newcomen Bank, which is now a government office building in Dublin. You walk in this bank building, and the thing that struck me about those interiors were there are three oval rooms, and they feel spatially. In fact, there's a photograph of me in one of them in this book. It feels spatially exactly like the Blue Room, the diplomatic reception room, and the Oval Room, the three stacked ovals in the center of the White House residence today. The Oval Office was a creation of the 20th century. It was not an initial concept of Hoban's.
But his bringing the oval concept was one of the big contributions that Hoban made to the final design, wasn't it?
It was. We think, or we know that George Washington liked to host levees where he would greet people and he would be in a receiving line and he would bow, not necessarily embrace or shake hands, but they would bow very properly. And he liked to do that in a rounded room, and he had that done in Philadelphia. So there's some discussion as to whether the ovals resulted from George Washington wanting that rounded effect, or, as I believe, it was something that James Hoban had seen and experienced and knew, and it pitched to George Washington, and perhaps it was a harmonization of the two. I think Washington really liked Hoban. Hoban was skilled. He would do exactly what Washington wanted, and Washington knew that with Hoban he would get the type of building that he envisioned for the president.
And Hoban beat out Thomas Jefferson for the job.
Well, yes, Thomas Jefferson anonymously applied or submitted for the competition, but I think Washington had his thumb on the scale. Washington knew all along that he wanted an Irish builder that knew how to do this soft stone building, as the White House became, would be a stone building, which was significant and important enough in America, would be seen as significant and important in Europe, but not a grand palace of some sort. And Hoban also was a Mason, which is interesting. We don't know much about the Mason relationship, the Freemason relationship between Hoban and Washington, but they were both Freemasons. So perhaps there was a connection there. But there was something about Hoban that Washington remembered a year later, brought him to Philadelphia, talked to him, and then recommended him to the commissioners, the group in Washington that was overseeing the building of the White House.
Yeah, must have been a pretty tough client. Can you imagine poor Hoban? He's got a man who just won the Revolutionary War, and is
right.
the father of his country. I mean, boy, you talk about some tough clients. That must have been something for poor Hoban here.
I can only imagine.
And Washington stuck his finger a lot in. My mother would call him a Budinsky. I mean, he was involved, wasn't he?
Well, he had been given 10 years by the Congress to develop this federal city with a home for the Congress and a home for the president. And this was a swampy land here. It wasn't a perfect, pristine lot upon which to build. And so there were a lot of things that he was concerned about going right and going well. In the end, not only would his reputation be on the line, George Washington's, for building this federal city, but eventually it would become named after him, Washington, D.C. So he was deeply and personally invested. And of the many legacies of George Washington, the building of the White House was one of them. I say frequently, we've had 45 men now who've been president of the United States, not 46 because Cleveland was president twice.
Right.
The only thing they all have in common is they all lived in that one White House, the building that we're talking about today, except for George Washington, our only president who didn't live there, but he selected the plot of land and he hired this young designer and builder to build the house.
Yeah, I guess it was John Adams was the first president to come into the White House.
That's right.
And if I remember from David McCullough's book, it was cold, it was damp, it was pretty miserable in those days.
That's right. There was, you'll remember that scene in the McCullough miniseries where the Adams are arriving in November of 1800 and they walk up these planks into the North Portico. There were no herald trumpets or red carpet. It was pretty plain, and you could see behind them what is now Lafayette Park, this muddy work ground.
Yeah.
And that, in fact, is where Hoban had his carpenter shed and did the operation of building the White House over 8 years from 1792 to 1800 from what is now called Lafayette Park.
Yeah. And something else I learned from the book, which again, I congratulate you on a very fine work. It's very well done and beautiful illustrations and contributions from distinguished historians. But was that originally the concept was a 3-story building at one point?
It was, and that would have been similar to a Leinster House. When you walk up on Leinster House, your eye sees 3 floors. Our eye today sees 2 main floors of the White House, but there are actually 6 levels. There are mezzanines in there. There's a basement. There's an upper level that you cannot see. There's a hidden level below the ground where if you get up close to the north side of the White House and you look over, you can see it there. but to the eye looking from Pennsylvania Avenue, you do not see that level. Washington actually increased the size of Hoban's design by 20%, but he brought down the floor so that it was to the eye only 2 levels.
Yeah, I think if I remember from the book, it was something like, it was supposed to be about 140 something feet wide in length, and now it's 168 feet. So
that's right. That's right.
Well, one topic that we're wrestling with and have been wrestling with, frankly, since the beginning of this country is the slave trade, and the fact in this case that many of the laborers were slaves and freed slaves who worked on the building. What was your what can you say about that experience?
Well, we cannot gloss over the fact that Hoban himself was a slave owner.
Right.
And he engaged those slaves that he owned in the work of the White House. He also hired slaves from slave owners to labor building the White House in complement with free slaves or free slaves who were now free, contracted white workers, and Europeans. There were a number of European craftsmen who came over, specifically the Scottish stonemasons came, and the intricacies you see carved all along the columns and the pilasters around the house. Extraordinary garland above the north door of the White House was carved by the stonemasons. All of these different kinds of workers worked together around, in and out of the carpenter shed, which was the headquarters in what is now Lafayette Park. The enslaved people, an extraordinary, compelling story. We have now done, we're in our 7th year of research on who they were, who owned them. To the degree we can determine their names, we've now done that. That research is on our website, whitehousehistory.org. In recent months, we have placed visual markers and audio stories about them in Lafayette Park, so you can go out there and hear the story told of these people.
Interesting.
The next step is we're working on a descendants project to learn. My dream would be to find a young woman in St. Louis who had no idea that her great-great-great-great-grandfather helped build the White House. And then, you know, Rob, there's another evolution to that story. Once the house was built and our presidents moved in, 9 of our early American presidents either owned slaves who worked for them in the White House or hired from slave owners in slave labor to come and work for them in the White House. And so we're telling that story as well. An important part of American history. American history is a wonderful thing, but it is not a perfect thing. And there are some dark, evil marks throughout our history. But those stories need to be told, and they need to be told in context. And we try to do that in this book about the building of the White House.
That's great. Well, let's conclude, Stewart. Well, first of all, you've got my audience is going to say, what is that? What is behind him there? What is that? What is that image? Could you kind of scoot over to the side and let us see some of that?
Sure. Well, this is a painting by the Washington artist Peter Waddell, who's done many wonderful paintings for us. And this one happened to depict the first Japanese visitors to the White House during the presidency of James Buchanan. And they are arriving here at the North Portico, and they're in their traditional Japanese attire and garb. And Peter tells these very intricate stories about different elements of White House history that he depicts in these wonderful images. And this is one of those. It's in our conference room here at our offices, which we're located in historic Decatur House, just north of the White House on Lafayette Park.
Right. Well, if I could ask you, what did you learn that kind of surprised you, or is a new thought that you derived in doing all the research for the book? And what would you say to architects and contractors and people in real estate about this historic building?
I think I'll end with what we began with, and that was this man who was not known, whose name was not known then and is largely not known now, but whose work has stood the test of time, and the name of his work is known around the world, and that's the White House. So to those who labor and build and construct these great monuments of design and construction and building today, maybe your name will be known in your field, but that building is going to be there and stand there long after you're gone and will tell a story of your life and your work, which is very important. And that's what this did with James Hoban. The image on the cover of this book is the only known image of the man, James Hoban. It's a small wax portrait that is in the collection of the White House, and that's it. Now you know his name, you see the one image of what he looks like, but every day on the news, you see the result of his work, and it's the White House, the people's house, the home of the President of the United States.
Right. Well, thank you, Stewart. It's been great talking to you. I've been speaking with Stewart McLaurin, the president of the White House Historical Association. We're talking about the new book that he has edited and contributed to, James Hoban, Designer and Builder of the White House. And congratulations on a very distinguished work.
Thank you very much. Anyone would like to have it, you can get it on our website, whitehousehistory.org.
Thank you. Take care.
Right. Thank you.